What if the one night you regret the most was the moment someone had been waiting their whole life for? What if the man you tried to run from was the one already choosing you forever? Hey everyone, before we dive into today's video, please do subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your country or city in the comments below. It truly amazes me how far our community reaches around the world. All right, now let's begin. The sea was calm outside, but inside Calla Avery's chest, everything felt like a storm. She stood in the crew hallway of the luxury cruise ship Azora Pearl, clutching the resignation letter that kept getting wetter and soggier from her nervous palms. Her heart hammered so loudly she wondered if anyone else could hear it. Just last night, she had done something unthinkable, unplanned, unprofessional, unforgivable. She had slept with her boss. Not just any boss, the mysterious, breathtakingly beautiful head of marine programs, Marnus Vale. The man everybody whispered about. The one whose eyes looked like the ocean before a storm, deep, endless, and unpredictable. And now she couldn't even look at her own reflection without remembering how his touch had made her feel like she was dissolving and being remade. Shame rose and burned in her throat. This was her first real job, her first chance to build income after everything her family had gone through. And she had ruined it in one impulsive night, guided by loneliness, exhaustion, and something about him that made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time. But everything beautiful could be dangerous. Water could heal, but it could drown too. She walked toward his office, each step echoing like footsteps toward a cliff edge. The corridors smelled of salt and steel. Sunlight poured through round porthole windows, scattering across the polished floors. Calla tried to steady her breath, reminding herself this was just a job. People quit all the time. But they didn't quit like this. Not like someone running from a fire they themselves had lit. Her crew uniform felt too tight, too sharp, like the fabric was punishing her for thinking she ever belonged here. She replayed fragments of last night, his hand brushing her cheek after she had slipped on the wet deck, his voice a gentle low hum, his lips so close she could taste the ocean on them. It had been quiet, warm, unreal, and now she needed to pretend it never happened. Pretend she hadn't melted in his arms. Pretend her soul hadn't recognized something ancient in him, something powerful, something other. She gripped the letter tighter, whispering to herself, just hand it in, walk away, forget him. The words sounded weak even to her own ears. But the universe had no intention of making it easy. The moment she entered his office, he was already there, leaning against the glass window that overlooked the endless stretch of Caribbean blue. Marnus Vale turned slowly, as if he knew she was coming before she had even knocked. His dark hair glistened faintly, as though still touched by ocean droplets, and his eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath stop. He wore no uniform jacket today, only a tailored white shirt rolled at the sleeves, revealing strong arms that still held the memory of holding her. The room smelled faintly of sea brine and something wild, like tide pool air. Calla, he said softly, too knowingly. His name and his voice felt like a secret being spoken. She swallowed hard and thrust the resignation letter out, her hand shaking. I need to resign, effective immediately. Her voice split, cracked, embarrassed her. She couldn't meet his eyes, couldn't survive whatever emotion lived in them. Silence filled the room, thick like deep water. Marnus didn't take the paper, didn't move, didn't even blink. He simply watched her, as though studying a fragile creature who didn't understand its own importance. Is that truly what you want? He asked. voice calm, slow, or is that what you think you deserve? The words struck her like a wave, knocking loose everything she was holding together. Shame, guilt, something softer, something aching. She lifted her chin, trying to find steel she didn't feel. I'm sorry. I crossed the line. I can't stay. She took a small step back, as if distance could break whatever invisible pole was between them. But then something flickered in his eyes. Pain. Real pain. As if her leaving wasn't just disappointing, it was devastating. Before she could understand that, before she could even breathe, someone knocked sharply and the door swung open. Sir, Captain requests your presence on deck 5. The investors have arrived early. The assistant paused, eyes flicking from Calla to the letter in her hand. And then Calla's world tilted because the assistant bowed slightly when addressing Marinus. Bowed. The gesture used only for the owner, the highest authority on the ship, the CEO. The man she thought was just her department superior was the owner of the entire cruise line. Marinus Vale didn't just run the marine program. He owned Azura Pearl, the ship, the company, every crew contract, including hers. Calla felt the floor drop out from under her. Her breath left her. Her vision dimmed at the edges. She hadn't slept with her boss. She had slept with the CEO. And he hadn't told her. And for a moment, a single, unbearable moment, she saw something ancient, heartbroken, and impossibly deep in his ocean-colored eyes. As if he had been waiting his whole life for her to walk through that door. Calla stumbled back, her voice a whisper, breaking like foam on rocks. You already knew I was leaving. Marinus didn't chase her. He simply whispered, I knew you would try. And something in his voice sounded like the sea calling home what once belonged to it.
The day it all began didn't feel special at first. The Azura Pearl had been docked in the port of San Aurelio, a sun-washed coastal city famous for white stone piers and water so clear you could see silver fish flashing beneath the surface. Calla Avery stepped aboard that day, with a backpack, 2 uniforms, and a heart stitched together by necessity. She had taken the job not because she loved boats or travel, but because she needed the paycheck. Her younger sister's medical treatments had drained every savings her family had. Calla was 22 and already had the eyes of someone who had learned to carry too much. She was quiet, observant, graceful in the way that comes from learning how to take up less space. But the ocean made her feel something she had long missed: breath. She liked the way the wind moved freely, the way the horizon had no walls. It reminded her there was more to life than scraping to survive. The crew onboarding area bustled with noise, new hires laughing nervously, supervisors barking instructions, luggage wheeled loudly across polished teak floors. Calla stood at the edge, gripping her duffel strap, trying to ignore the coil of anxiety in her stomach. Then she heard it, a low murmur of attention sweeping through the room, like a tide pulling toward a single point. People were looking past her, toward the entrance. She turned, and there he was, Marinus Vale. She didn't know his name then, didn't know who he was. She only saw a man whose presence made the air shift. He walked like the sea itself had shaped him, smooth, controlled, powerful. His dark hair was damp, as though he'd just come from the water. His eyes, blue-green, shifting like light through waves, skimmed over the room. People straightened, whispered, watched. But his gaze did something strange when it landed on her. It paused, not briefly, not politely, but like recognition, like memory, like he had been waiting. Calla looked away quickly, heat rushing to her cheeks. She didn't believe in fairy tales, and men like him didn't notice girls who counted coins to buy soap. But later that day, during the mandatory safety walkthrough, Calla found herself assigned to the marine observation deck, the one area of the ship that overlooked a private section of sea reserved for research dives. The deck smelled like salts and sun-warmed rope, with the wind lifting her hair and soft spray chilling her cheeks. She leaned against the railing, closing her eyes just for a moment, letting the ocean calm her racing thoughts. That's when she heard footsteps. Slow, certain. She didn't have to turn to know it was him. Something in her chest already knew. "You're new," Marina said softly, standing just close enough that she could feel warmth radiating between them, but not touching. His voice was calm, deep, almost melodic, as if the words were shaped by tides. Calla nodded, careful to keep her gaze fixed on the horizon. Calla Avery, environmental support staff. She expected him to dismiss her, most high-ranking staff did. But he didn't. Instead, he said her name again. Quietly. Like a secret. "Welcome, Calla." She allowed herself a small exhale. And then, just briefly, she met his eyes. Something in them startled her. Not flirtation, not arrogance, but sorrow. Sorrow so deep it felt older than time. The days that followed were slow and warm, panted in sunlight and ocean wind. Calla worked hard, cleaning salt from observation glass, preparing equipment, logging water readings, but the sea made even labor feel lighter. She laughed for the first time in months, real and unguarded whenever gulls swooped playfully overhead or dolphins broke the surface. But always, there was awareness. Marinus would appear sometimes, watching the horizon, speaking softly to the marine staff, consulting maps that looked older than any she'd ever seen. Whenever she entered a room he was in, he looked up. Not every time, but enough. And every time, that same flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. The crew whispered about him, how he rarely slept, how he swam alone at night in waters divers feared. Some said he was strange. Some said he was brilliant. Some said he was cold. But Calla knew better. He wasn't cold. He was contained, like the ocean before its storms. And sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, he walked the decks barefoot, as if shoes were an inconvenience, as if the ship itself were land he tolerated only because he must. Then came the night everything changed. The air was heavy with humidity, thick with that warm, salt-sweet scent that comes before summer storms. The crew had gathered for routine evening deck checks, but a sudden gust lifted a storage tarp, sending slippery equipment cases sliding across wet flooring. Calla turned too quickly. Her foot hit seawater. She slipped. Her body lurched toward the deck's edge, nothing between her and the black, pounding dark below. Her heart seized. She did not scream. And then, arms, strong and certain, wrapped around her waist and pulled her back from the drop. For one suspended moment, her back pressed into a chest that was solid, steady, real. Her hand clutched fabric, the front of his shirt. Marinus. His breath was warm near her ear. His heart beat steady. The world held still. The storm lights flickered. Rain began to fall in slow, warm drops. He didn't let go. Not immediately. His grip was careful, protective. But his eyes, when she finally looked up, were full of fear. Not the fear of almost losing her, but the fear of almost revealing something he shouldn't. And she realized then, without knowing how, that he had known she was going to fall. Not predicted, known. As if he had felt it. They said nothing, because nothing would have been enough. But the silence carried everything that would lead to the night she tried to forget, and he never could. The storm came in slow at first, dark clouds crawling across the sky like ink spreading in water.
The deck lights flickered as the waves began to rise, the ship rocking in long, deep motions that made loose equipment groan and shift. Calla stood near the railing again, but this time she was careful, bracing her stance, feeling every change in the wind. She was supposed to be finishing her inspection logs, but her mind was elsewhere, on the way Marinus had looked when he caught her. That fear, that recognition, the sense that he wasn't surprised at all. She had replayed it 100 times, telling herself it was just adrenaline, just instinct, just a boss protecting an employee. But the truth sat warm and humming in her chest. He held her like he had held her before, like somewhere beyond memory they had already touched, and that thought terrified her more than the storm. The rain thickened, warm and heavy, soaking her uniform, flattening her hair. She didn't care. The ocean felt alive, shifting, breathing with intent. Crew scattered around her, securing equipment and latching storage bins, but Calla felt the storm differently. She felt drawn toward the sea, called. A strange ache filled her, deep and hollow, like something waking up. And then she saw him. Marinus stood at the bow, his shirt plastered to him by rain, hair dripping, hands gripping the railing as though steadying himself against a force only he could feel. Lightning flashed, illuminating the sharp lines of his face, casting his eyes in an unnatural silver. He was beautiful, impossibly so, but there was something else now, something unhuman, something ancient. Calla's heart raced. She wanted to look away but couldn't. He turned, slowly, as though he had heard her heartbeat through the storm. Their eyes met, and the wind went still. For one impossible second, everything stopped. The storm hit full force. A wave taller than a house crashed against the ship's side, drenching the deck in foaming seawater. Calla stumbled, gripping the railing to keep from falling. Crew shouted orders, running to stabilize loose lines. Wind howled, sirens sounded, invisibility narrowed to a blur of white rage. Amid the chaos, Calla saw something impossible. Marinus stepping toward the railing, stepping too close. "Marinus!" she shouted, her voice ripped by wind. He didn't flinch, didn't answer. He was watching the sea, not like a man seeing danger, but like someone recognizing a call. And then she saw it. Movement in the waves. Not just water. Shapes. Pale forms just beneath the surface. Calla blinked, rain stinging her eyes. No. She had imagined that. She had to have imagined that. Before fear could swallow her, Marinus turned his head toward her, finally, and she saw something raw, aching, desperate. "Get inside," he said, voice low and different now, resonant, almost vibrating. She stepped closer instead. Another wave thundered against the ship. A crate broke free, sliding across the slick deck straight toward her. Calla froze, too fast to run. Marinus moved impossibly quickly, throwing himself between her and the crate, shielding her with his own body. The impact would have crushed them both. Instead, it stopped, mid-slide, as if the water itself had slowed it, as if the ship had intervened. Calla's breath caught. Marinus was breathing hard, eyes glowing with something she didn't understand. He placed his hands on her shoulders, steady but trembling. "You can't be here when it happens," he whispered. She didn't ask what he meant. She couldn't, because she already knew something inside him was changing. His pulse under her hands was too fast, too strong. His skin was too warm, and his eyes, those shifting oceanic eyes, looked like they weren't reflecting the sea anymore. They were remembering it. Lightning split the sky. The ship tilted. Calla clung to him as the world heaved beneath them. And then there was no ship, no storm, no screaming crew. There was water, cool,
endless, quiet water. She wasn't drowning. She wasn't falling. She was floating. She opened her eyes underwater and saw him, Marinus, not human, not entirely. His dark hair flowed around him like drifting seaweed. His back and arms shimmered faintly with patterns like scales dissolving into skin. His eyes were wide, luminous, full of grief and wonder and fear. The water around them pulsed with a soft blue glow, as though the sea itself had opened its arms. Calla didn't feel panic. She felt recognized. She reached for him without thinking. His hand closed around hers with a trembling reverence. And then she was back. Back on the rain-soaked deck, wind howling, alarms blaring. But the truth had broken. The world had changed. And when Marinus looked at her now, he didn't hide. Couldn't. She saw him. The real him. A man shaped by ocean tides. A man that belonged to the deep. A merman.
The storm eased by morning, but the memory of last night clung to Calla like wet fabric against skin. She sat on the lower observation deck, hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea, staring out at the glittering turquoise sea as if it might answer her. But the ocean didn't speak. It only shimmered and listened indifferent, as if daring her to understand what had happened. No one else remembered the moment the world stopped, the moment she had been underwater without drowning, the moment she saw Marinus not as a man, but as something born of tide and moon. Crew members were too busy reviewing storm safety reports and cleaning scattered equipment to notice her staring blankly into the horizon. But she wasn't thinking about safety or protocol. She was thinking about his eyes, those impossible, ancient, aching eyes. She had always loved the ocean, its mystery, its weight, but she had never believed in fairy tales. And yet, she had seen him. She had seen truth. And truth didn't go away when the sun rose. Marinus didn't approach her that morning. She felt his absence like a missing tide, still present beneath the surface, but held back with effort. She found herself scanning the decks for him, yet also fearing the moment he would appear. What would she say? What could she say? I saw you turn into something not human? I think the sea listens when you breathe? Even thinking it felt unreal, and yet nothing had ever felt more real. She remembered the weight of his hands on her shoulders, the way the water embraced them, the way her heart didn't panic. That was the strangest part. She hadn't been afraid, not of drowning, not of him. Instead, she had felt known. As if some part of her soul had recognized him long before her mind had. The realization shook her, and it terrified her more than the fall, more than the storm, more than the truth itself. Because if her heart had recognized him, then nothing in her life had been an accident. Late afternoon sunlight washed the deck in gold when he finally found her. His steps were soft, careful, as though approaching a startled bird. Calla didn't look up, but she felt him like gravity. "We need to talk," Marinus said quietly. She set her mug down, hands trembling. "What are you?" The words slipped out small, fragile, but they held the weight of a world about to break open. He sat across from her, elbows on his knees, head bowed like a man praying. "I didn't expect you to see," he began, voice carrying the hush of waves withdrawing from shore. "Not yet." His fingers traced the wood plank between them. "My people live in the deep, not as stories, not as myth. We are guardians, watchers, bound to the tides. Some of us are chosen to walk among humans." He lifted his gaze to hers, and the ocean lived there. I was one of them. Calla's breath caught. "So you're a mer-being," he murmured. "Not quite one world, not fully the other. My form shifts with the tides, with emotion, with the pull of the sea." His voice dimmed.
And last night, I lost control. Calla's heart ached, not with fear, but with understanding. The sadness she'd seen in him before made sense now. He didn't belong anywhere, not fully. Does anyone else know? She whispered. He shook his head. No. They wouldn't understand. To them, we are legends, fantasies, something to exploit or fear. The wind lifted his hair, revealing faint, shimmering patterns along his neck that faded as quickly as they appeared. I built this cruise line to protect the waters my people live in, to keep ships from damaging breeding grounds, to keep sonar from shattering migration paths, to keep oil companies from poisoning nurseries. Calla stared at him. He wasn't wealthy for luxury. He was wealthy to protect, to shield, to guard. I thought I could do it quietly, from above, without being seen, without hurting anyone. His voice trembled barely, until you almost fell. The silence between them throbbed. Calla's chest tightened. You were afraid of revealing yourself? She whispered, but he shook his head. No, I was afraid of losing you. The words were a tide crashing into her. Calla's breath shuddered, her vision blurred. She didn't understand how he could say something so deep, so impossible, when they barely knew each other. But that wasn't true. They had known each other the moment their eyes met. Something in her bones had known, something ancient, something aching. Why? She asked, her voice barely a thread. Marinus exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he had carried for lifetimes. Because, Calla, I have seen you before. The world stilled. Heat dissolved. Air thickened. Not in this life, he continued. In the deep. Long ago. Before memory had names. You loved the ocean. You belonged to it. And when you were taken to the land, I followed. The sea glittered like a witness. Calla's heart pounded, not in fear, but in recognition. Deep recognition, the kind that doesn't ask for proof, the kind that comes from the soul. She didn't run. She didn't speak. She simply looked at him and understood why leaving him would feel like drowning.
Calla didn't know how to breathe after that revelation. The sea was calm now, the ship gliding through late evening waters tinted lavender, but her heart was storm-tossed. She leaned back against the railing, eyes lowered, as though afraid the world would tilt again if she met his gaze. A past life? A soul memory? It sounded impossible. Too big. Too much. Yet her body remembered him. The way his arms felt. The way the water had held her like she belonged. These were not things that logic could explain. Marinus stood a few feet away, watching her carefully, not with the intensity of a man demanding affection, but with the patience of someone who had waited lifetimes and could wait 1,000 more. That, more than anything, shook her. Calla swallowed, speaking slowly. You say you've seen me before? But She hesitated, shame biting her. I don't remember any of that. Marinus nodded, not hurt, not surprised. Humans forget. The land takes memory away. The ocean keeps it. His tone held no accusation, only quiet truth. Calla turned back toward the water, her reflection wavering in the waves. And you remembered me? He stepped closer. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. I never forgot. Later that night, sleep wouldn't come. Her cabin felt too small, too quiet, too full of questions. She paced the narrow floor, moonlight spilling through the porthole in soft blue ribbons. Her heart was restless, thrumming like tides against rocks. She kept seeing flashes, impossible flickers behind her eyes.
Sunlight dancing on underwater sand, laughter echoing in salt water, fingers entwined with someone whose face she couldn't quite reach, memories that weren't memories, feelings without names. She pressed both palms to the cool window, watching moonlight paint pathways on the water. Something about the sea called to her, not softly, not gently, but insistently, as though she was missing something vital. She needed air, movement. She slipped out of her cabin and climbed the stairs to the top deck, barefoot, her footsteps silent against the cold, still floor. The ship was quiet at night, only a few lights glowing along the edges, casting soft halos across the waves. The sea shone silver under the moon, smooth and endless, like a doorway. And there he was, standing at the railing, as if he had been waiting for her since the world began. Marinus didn't turn when she approached. He didn't need to. He felt her presence like the tide feels the pool of the moon. Calla stood beside him, drawn by gravity more than choice. "You didn't sleep either," she whispered. He gave a soft exhale, part sigh, part laugh. "I haven't slept properly in years." The moonlight reflected off his skin, making it glow faintly. Not human glow, sea glow, deep glow. It was subtle, but unmistakable. "Does it hurt?" she asked quietly. "Being between worlds?" Marinus looked at the horizon, his expression unreadable. "Only when I'm alone." The words hung in the air, heavy, fragile, enormous. Calla's throat tightened. He wasn't asking her to solve his loneliness, or promise anything, or understand everything. He was just telling the truth. And truth was the most dangerous form of tenderness. She stepped closer, not touching, but choosing proximity. "I don't know what any of this means yet, but I'm not afraid of you." Marinus didn't look at her, but she saw the relief in his posture, quiet and deep as a tide finally coming home. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was warm, familiar, like climbing back into a story she once knew by heart. Then Marinus turned to her, eyes catching moonlight and breaking it into shifting greens and blues. "There is something else you need to know," he murmured. His voice had changed, lower, softer, almost reverent. "Last night, when the storm broke, you weren't supposed to remember any of it." Calla's breath caught. "What do you mean?" He leaned one hand on the railing, looking down at the water as though speaking to it as well. "When we shift forms, when the ocean reveals itself to a human, the water erases the memory. It protects us and you. Anyone who glimpses us forgets." He finally met her eyes. "But you didn't forget." The wind stilled. The world stilled. Calla's pulse thundered in her ears. "So what does that mean?" Marinus stepped closer, slowly, carefully, like approaching something sacred. "It means the ocean remembers you. It means you were never meant to leave it." The words were not a claim. They were a revelation, and Calla felt it. Not in her mind, but in the deepest part of her being, the part that moved when the tide changed and the moon rose. The sea wasn't calling her. The sea was recognizing her.
The next morning broke warm and golden, but Calla woke feeling changed, like the tide had shifted somewhere inside her. She tried to follow routine, put on her uniform, tie her hair, clock in for her shift. But every familiar motion felt different now. The ship was the same, the sky was the same, the sea glittered as always. And yet she wasn't the same. The ocean's reflection didn't look like her anymore. It looked like a memory she hadn't fully uncovered. As she polished glass in the marine observation hall, her coworkers chatted about trivial things, dinner menus, who was flirting with who, how long into the next port. Calla tried to join,
tried to laugh, tried to pretend, but her laughter felt borrowed, her voice felt distant. She kept glancing toward the windows, toward the endless blue, not longing, recognition, as though part of her were still beneath those waves, waiting to be named. And she could no longer ignore the feeling that she was being watched. Not in a threatening way, but in a way that felt ancient and deliberate, like the sea itself had eyes. She felt it again later, during equipment checks on the lower aft deck. The water below was calm, smooth as dark glass. Too calm. Calla stood at the railing, staring down, breath catching as ripples spread across the surface. Not from wind, not from current, from movement. Something swam just below, large, slow, graceful. The water shimmered blue as though lit from beneath. Calla leaned forward, eyes wide, and then two shapes emerged, not fully, just enough. Two figures, sleek, elegant pale sea silver skin, eyes like moonlit tide pools, watching her, not the ship, not the deck. Her. The ocean glowed briefly around them, a quiet pulse, acknowledgement. Then they slipped back beneath, vanishing without a sound. Calla's breath trembled out of her. She hadn't imagined them. And the way they looked at her was not curiosity. It was recognition, like meeting distant relatives whose faces she could not yet remember. She pressed her hands to her chest, trying to steady her heartbeat. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. Because deep down, deep in bone and blood and breath, some part of her already knew this world. Marinus found her minutes later, quietly, as always, as though he followed her heartbeat instead of her footsteps. "You saw them," he said, not asking. Calla nodded slowly. "They knew me." Marinus's jaw tensed, not in anger, but in something like ache. "They've been waiting." He leaned on the railing beside her, staring at the horizon with an expression both longing and burdened. "My people felt you the moment you stepped aboard, Calla. The ocean remembers its own." She swallowed. "But I'm not one of you." He looked at her then, really looked, not like a man observing, but like a memory resurfacing. "You are human, and you are something more. Your blood carries the ocean, not by birth, but by bond." Her breath stumbled. A bond with who? The wind quieted. Marinus didn't move, didn't blink. "With me." The words were soft, not romantic, not dramatic, just true. Calla felt the world tilt, not like falling, but like aligning. That night came quiet and heavy, warm breezes drifting across open decks. Calla couldn't stay in her cabin. The walls felt too tight, the air too dry. She went to the top deck again, barefoot, in a loose cotton sweater that smelled faintly of laundry soap and salt. The moon was full, casting shimmering paths across the water that looked almost like roads. And Marinus was there again, resting his hands on the railing, gaze distant. But tonight, there was exhaustion in his posture, shoulders slumped, breath shallow. Calla approached slowly. "You're tired," she murmured. He laughed softly. "The tide pulls harder every year. I've been away from the deep too long." She touched the railing beside his hand, not touching him, but choosing nearness. "Why stay here then?" His voice was quiet. "Because I was waiting for you to return, even if you never remembered, even if you didn't choose me." The honesty hit her like a wave, strong and steady. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked the question that had been forming all day. "If the ocean called me back, would I still be human?" Marinus turned to her fully, moonlight painting him in silver warmth. "You would be both, as I am both." Then softer, aching. "But only if you choose it." Calla looked at the sea then, not as a stranger or a danger or a myth, but as something hers,
a home she had forgotten, an inheritance of tide and memory. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. I don't know what I'm choosing yet. Marinus nodded. No disappointment, no impatience. I will wait, he whispered. I always have. And for the first time in her life, the ocean didn't feel like something outside her. It felt like something inside her, finally awakening.
The days that followed moved strangely, as though time itself had begun to breathe slower. Calla went through her shifts, cleaned railings, checked guest wristbands, handed out safety pamphlets, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. Every time she passed a window or walked near the deck edge, she felt the ocean calling in a way that wasn't sound, more like memory pressing against skin. She tried to explain it once to her coworker Nikki, who was busy adjusting her eyeliner in a compact mirror. It's like something's tugging on me, not physical, just inside. Nikki paused, thoughtful for exactly 2 seconds. Girl, that's what falling in love feels like. And then she walked off. Calla stood frozen. Was that what this was? Love? She didn't think love was supposed to feel ancient, like it existed before you were born, like it had been waiting, watching, remembering. Every night she found herself returning to the top deck, and every night Marinus was there. No words necessary, just shared presence, like two tides meeting in silence. But tonight, something was different. The air felt heavy, charged like before a storm, but the sky was perfectly clear. The ocean was still, too still. Morena stood at the railing, posture rigid. Calla approached slowly. What's wrong? His jaw clenched. The sea is shifting, too soon. He turned to her, and there was fear in his eyes, real, unguarded fear. My people are calling for me. Calla's heart stung. So you're leaving? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to her, close enough that she felt the warmth radiating from him. If I go tonight, it may be many tides before I return. She swallowed. Then don't go. He closed his eyes, exhaled trembling like breaking waves. If I don't go, I could lose what remains of my voice. The ocean is calling me home, and if I resist too long, I will fade. The meaning struck her like cold water. They were not unbound. Their lives were not shaped like human lives. They were shaped like currents, and currents pulled. Calla reached for his hand, not thinking, not hesitating. Their fingers touched, and for the first time, Marinus let himself feel it. The connection that had always been there sparked bright and warm, like electricity wrapped in gentleness. The moment her skin met his, vision flooded her. Not hallucination, but memory. Not hers, his. She saw the deep ocean, not dark, but glowing with shifting blues and greens like galaxies living underwater. She saw coral kingdoms carved like cathedrals. She saw merfolk gliding through currents like birds through sky. And she saw herself, but not as she was now. She was younger, hair longer, swimming beside Marinus, laughing in currents that curled like ribbons. She wasn't Mermaid. Not then. But she belonged there. She had belonged there. Calla gasped, stumbling back, breath shaking. Marinus caught her. No shock in his expression. You remember? Her voice broke. I was there. I lived there. He nodded, eyes gentle with aching tenderness. You didn't drown, Calla. You were saved. You were loved. Her hands trembled. Why was I brought back? Marinus lowered his head, voice soft. Because humans do not survive the deep forever. Your body couldn't bear it. I had to let you go. His silence afterward was a wound all its own.
Calla turned toward the ocean, heart echoing with things she could finally name. She remembered the currents, the shimmering cities of coral and light. She remembered laughing underwater without needing to breathe. She remembered fingers entwined with Moranis's swimming through moonlit shallows. She remembered being home. The grief hit her, slowly, then all at once. Grief for a life she didn't know she'd lost. "You saved me," she whispered. Moranis nodded. "And I lost you." The confession landed between them like a tide returning. Calla's voice was barely a breath. "But I came back." The words trembled with quiet wonder. Moranis looked at her then, not with longing but with recognition. "Yes," he said, "the ocean brought you back to me." The moonlight reflected in the sea, painting silver lines that seemed to lead outward, 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 toward home. The ship suddenly vibrated, subtle but not wrong, a shift in weight, a roll of the hull that had nothing to do with normal waves. Alarms didn't sound, but Calla felt the change like instinct. Something massive moved beneath the surface. Moranis stiffened. "They're here." Calla's breath caught. "Your people?" He shook his head once, slow, controlled. "No." The water rolls in a long, silent swell. No splash, no roar, just a smooth, towering presence rising beneath the waves, too large to see fully. The air thickened. Calla felt dread coil cold in her stomach. "What is that?" she whispered. Moranis's voice was barely audible. "A tide warden." She had no idea what that meant, but the fear in his voice was enough. The ocean was no longer calling gently. It was demanding, summoning, claiming. Moranis turned to her, urgency sharp now. "If the warden has risen, the ocean has chosen for us." Calla's heartbeat thundered. "Chosen what?" His eyes met hers, storm bright, love soft, ocean deep.
The sky fractured in streaks of pale lightning, though there were no clouds. The water beneath the ship glowed from within, rolling lights, green and silver. Calla gripped the railing. The entire sea seemed alive. Marina stepped forward, wind tugging at his hair, his voice low but certain. "The warden won't harm you if I stand between." That word again, warden, echoed through Calla's chest. The glow spread in a circle, and from the circle rose something vast, scales the color of storm glass, eyes like prisms, a creature half spirit, half current. Its voice wasn't a sound, it was pressure, vibration, memory. "Moranis of the shoals," it said, though its mouth never moved. "You have delayed the tide." Moranis's reply was almost a plea. "She is not ready." The water surged higher. The ocean decides readiness. The bond is open. The light turned toward Calla. For a heartbeat, she saw flashes of herself, not on the ship but underwater, reaching for the same hand. The warden's gaze pierced her. "Do you choose the depths or do you turn away?" Calla wanted to speak, but the choice weighed heavier than language. The air smelled of salt and rain. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like the ship might hear it. "I don't know what it means," she whispered. The warden's glow softened. "It means memory. It means truth." The next instant, the sea reached up and pulled her under. No time to scream, no struggle, just silence. Then warmth, then light. Calla's body didn't sink, it floated, surrounded by ribbons of luminescent current. Moranis was beside her, though he didn't swim, he belonged. Around them, colors shimmered like auroras through clear water. She could breathe, not with lungs, but with skin, with blood. Her eyes adjusted, and before her stretched a city built from coral and glass, swaying towers wrapped in living light. It wasn't fantasy, it was home. Memories rushed through her like tides breaking through a dam. She saw herself as a child found on a beach after a storm, waves curling around her but never claiming her. She saw Moranis visiting her in dreams when she was young, his voice always calling her back. She saw the moment he had lifted her unconscious body from the deep,
carrying her to shore, whispering promises only the sea could keep. "I will find you again," he had said. And he had. Tears streamed from her eyes, vanishing instantly into the water. "Why didn't you tell me?" she breathed. Marinus' expression carried centuries of sorrow. "Would you have believed me?" She couldn't answer. The warden's glow shimmered again. "The tide remembers its own. The surface world will forget you by dawn. Choose now." Calla's chest tightened. She looked up through the glowing water, up to where sunlight shimmered faint and far away. The ship, the people, her old life, it all felt impossibly distant. "If I stay," she said softly, "I lose them." Marinus nodded. "But you gain what you were." The words were not persuasion, they were truth. She turned toward him. "And if I go back?" His voice was nearly broken. "Then you lose me." Silence filled the water, more honest than words. The ocean pulsed between them, patient, eternal. Calla floated in the middle of two worlds, breath and current, surface and soul. Then slowly she reached for Marinus' hand. "I can't stay forever, but I can't forget either." The warden's glow dimmed as though listening. The sea around them stilled. "Then remember both," the warden said. It touched her forehead with a light like sunrise, and in the next instant, she was back on the deck, coughing water, wind howling, night sky torn open above her. Marinus was gone. Only the faint shimmer of silver foam marked where he'd stood. The crew found her minutes later, drenched and shaking, whispering, "He was real." None of them believed her, but the ocean did. When Calla looked down into the waves, the reflection that looked back wasn't only hers. It was both.
The ocean didn't rest after that night. It churned with restless energy, waves slapping against the hull as though something beneath the surface refused to let go. Calla returned to her duties, but the ship felt haunted. Guests whispered about strange lights in the water, about hearing music under the waves. The captain blamed magnetic interference. Calla knew better. She moved through her tasks in a blur, eyes drawn constantly to the horizon. Every reflection, every ripple seemed to hide Marinus' face. At night, she dreamed of the deep, coral halls, glowing currents, his hand slipping from hers. She'd wake gasping, hair damp as if she'd been underwater. And always the same whisper in her mind. Remember both. She tried, but memory was a tide, it didn't obey. By the third day, the sea began to rise. Storm warnings lit up the ship's monitors, crew scrambling, passengers herded indoors. Calla stood on deck, wind slicing across her face, heart pounding. She could feel it. The ocean was angry. It wasn't natural. The waves didn't move like storms did. They moved like purpose, like grief. The first flash of lightning illuminated the water below. And there he was, Marinus, standing on the waves as though they were stone, eyes fixed on her. She ran to the rail. "Why are you here?" she shouted into the wind. His voice echoed in her chest more than her ears. "Because you didn't choose." The thunder cracked like a broken heart. "I did. I chose to remember both." His expression was sorrow, not anger. The ocean doesn't understand half. The waves surged higher, the ship tilted, crew screaming orders. Calla clung to the rail as rain poured in sheets. Marinus lifted his hands, the sea obeying him. And then suddenly he faltered. The glow around him flickered. The storm wasn't his doing anymore. Something else was rising. A second shape emerged behind him, larger, darker, the warden. But its glow had changed, fractured with shadow. "The balance is broken," it intoned. "You divided the bond." Marinus turned, realization dawning. It's feeding on the fracture. The warden's voice deepened into the roar of 10,000 waves. "Wholeness must return."
Calla screamed above the wind. Then take me, end it. Marinus's shout tore through her mind. No, if it takes you, it takes everything. The lightning hit the mast, exploding into blinding white. The world split into light and darkness. When Calla opened her eyes, she was underwater again. No breath, no sky, no sound. Just stillness. The ship hung above like a ghost shadow. Below, the warden loomed, a storm given shape. Marinus floated between them, arms outstretched, his body trembling as if made of breaking light. Go back, he shouted, his voice raw. You'll drown. But Calla kicked downward, tears lost to salt. I won't leave you again. The warden's voice rippled through the water. One heart, one tide. Marinus's glow began to fade. She reached him, grabbed his face in her hands, and for the first time kissed him beneath the sea. It wasn't passion. It was memory meeting memory, sealing the broken current. The water pulsed around them, shifting color, darkness turning gold, storm becoming calm. The warden stilled. Balance restored. It whispered, and vanished into the depths. When Calla broke the surface again, dawn was spilling across the sky. The storm was gone. The ship was still. Passengers emerged in confusion, drenched but alive. But Marinus wasn't there. Only the faint shimmer of scales dissolved into the foam. Calla collapsed to her knees, salt and tears mixing on her lips. The sea lay quiet, almost gentle now. She whispered to it, voice breaking. You said you'd wait. A single wave rolled up to touch her hand, soft as a promise. She looked down and saw it. The pendant around her neck, one she hadn't worn in years, now glowing faintly blue. Inside, a single drop of living light swirled like captured tide. She pressed it to her heart, whispering, I remember. And far beneath the waves, something answered.
The world looked the same, but Calla wasn't the same inside it. The cruise resumed its course, passengers returning to their leisure routines as if a storm had it nearly swallowed them whole. Children splashed in pools, couples danced under fairy lights. The laughter stung like salt on wounds. Calla went through motions, refilling trays, offering smiles that didn't reach her eyes. The ocean had gone eerily calm, like a sleeping beast, but she could feel it breathing beneath. Every vibration through the hull hummed in her bones. Every whisper of wind carried the ocean's voice. At night, she sat alone on deck, holding the glowing pendant in her palm. It pulsed softly, steady as a heartbeat. She didn't know if it was his. She didn't know if it was him. But when she pressed it to her ear, she swore she could hear a hum, low, steady, like a lullaby from the deep. She began hearing it even when awake, not a sound exactly, a pull. During safety briefings, during dinner service, even mid-conversation. A pressure, subtle but constant, like the tide pressing against the shore. One night, unable to bear it, she whispered into the sea, Marinus, are you there? For a long while, only silence answered. Then, faint and warm as a sigh, always. The words didn't come from air, they came from inside her mind. Her knees gave out. The deck swayed. You're alive? She breathed. Not as you remember, came his voice, gentle, almost mournful. The bond saved the balance, but it bound me to the ocean. I am the tide now. She clutched the pendant so tightly it left a mark. Then I'll come to you, she whispered fiercely. I'll jump if I have to. The wind moved through her hair like fingers. No, he said, soft but final. You must live both worlds. That's what you chose.
Days bled into one another, though each sunrise felt lonelier than the last. Calla's co-workers noticed her distance. "You're zoning out again," Nikki teased one morning. Calla smiled weakly. "Just listening." "To what?" Nikki asked. "To the ocean," Calla said and walked away. That night, she dreamed vividly of walking along the shore at low tide, moonlight turning the waves silver. In the dream, Marinus waited where water met sand. His outline shimmered, faint, translucent. "You're fading," she said. "So are you. Into what you were meant to be." When she looked down, her legs shimmered with faint scales. She didn't feel fear this time, only calm. Marinus reached for her hand. "When the sea calls again, follow it. It won't be for death. It will be for beginning." The dream dissolved in white light, but she woke with salt on her lips. That morning, the captain announced they'd reached their final port. The passengers cheered. Calla felt nothing. She walked the deck one last time, eyes fixed on the horizon. The sea stretched endlessly, calm, infinite, waiting. "I'm leaving," she whispered. The pendant warmed in her palm, faint blue light pulsing like breath. A single wave broke against the hull, higher than the rest, sending a spray that reached her face. It felt like a goodbye kiss, or a promise. She smiled through tears. "I'll come back," she said softly. "I don't know how, but I will." When she disembarked hours later, the dock workers watched her linger at the edge of the pier, eyes closed, listening to the sea. The pendant around her neck shimmered once, then went still. She turned and walked toward the city, toward a world that would never fully understand her, but would forever carry the ocean in her shadow. Behind her, the waves rolled gently, patient, eternal, and beneath them, somewhere deep where sunlight never reached, the tide pulsed in rhythm with her heart. The sea was waiting. Always had been, always would. Weeks passed, and the city's rhythm swallowed Calla whole. The streets buzzed with cars, neon reflections painted puddles gold, and the scent of salt came only from cheap fish stalls near the harbor. She rented a tiny apartment overlooking the docks, unable to move too far from the sea. At night, she'd lie awake listening for the tide beyond the noise of traffic, fingers curled around the pendant. The first few nights it stayed dim, lifeless, but on the 7th, just before dawn, it flickered faintly, one soft pulse, like a heartbeat reminding her it was still there. The moment it glowed, she felt him again, Marinus. Just a breath inside her thoughts, not words, but warmth. It was enough to bring tears. She whispered to the dark, "I haven't forgotten." The pendant grew warmer, answering her promise. But the more she listened, the more she felt something else too. A second heartbeat. The ocean inside her wasn't still anymore. It was growing louder. By morning, everything felt sharper. Colors, sounds, even the taste of air. When she brushed her hair, she noticed threads of silver glinting in the dark strands. Her skin shimmered faintly under sunlight. Not sweat, not oil, but luminescence. She hid it under sleeves and scarves, telling herself it was stress, light tricks, exhaustion. But deep down, she knew. The sea hadn't let her go. It was changing her. One evening, as she walked along the harbor after work, a boy dropped a shell into the water. Calla bent to retrieve it before it sank, and the moment her fingers touched the surface, the water parted. Just a few inches, but enough to expose the shell resting dry on sand. The boy gasped. Calla froze, staring at her reflection rippling in water that didn't wet her skin. Then, from somewhere deep, she heard Marinus's voice, faint and certain. "The tide in you is waking." That night, the dream returned stronger than before. The shore stretched beneath the violet sky,
the sea glowing like liquid moonlight. Marina stood there again, clearer now, more real. He reached toward her. The ocean is calling you back, Calla, not to drown you, to crown you. She shook her head, tears spilling. I can't. My life is here. His eyes softened. Your life is here. The ocean is part of here now. It lives through you. The words confused her. Half prophecy, half farewell. What do you mean? She asked. But he only smiled that sorrowful, knowing smile. Every storm has a heart, and you are this one's. When she woke, rain lashed against her window, though the forecast had promised clear skies. Lightning flickered over the harbor, illuminating the waves rising unnaturally high. She felt it instantly. Something wasn't right. By the time she reached the docks, the storm had grown violent, but she wasn't afraid. The wind howled, yet the rain seemed to bend away from her body. The pendant around her neck pulsed like fire, sinking with the rhythm of the waves. The water surged and rolled, pulling at boats, climbing the seawall. Calla stepped closer, whispering through the chaos, Marinus, tell me what to do. The answer came not in words, but in instinct. She raised her hand, palm toward the sea, and the storm listened. The wind shifted. The waves paused as though waiting for command. Her pulse slowed, breath sinking with the tide's rhythm. Please, she whispered, be still. And it was. The water calmed instantly, rain softening to mist. Fishermen watching from afar would later swear the storm had stopped around her. But in that stillness, Calla realized something terrifying. She hadn't just quieted the storm. She had become the storm. When the sea finally settled, the pendant cooled. The glow dimmed to a quiet blue. She dropped to her knees on the wet dock, shaking. The ocean beyond rippled gently, no longer wild, but awake. What am I becoming? She whispered. The answer echoed in her chest like an ancient tide. The sea's memory, given form. She pressed the pendant to her heart, eyes closed, and for a moment, she thought she heard him again. Marinus's voice, faint but proud. You're finding your tide. Calla opened her eyes to the first light of dawn. The storm was gone, but she knew another was coming. One not outside her, but within. The next morning broke eerily calm. The air held that hollow quiet that follows great storms, a silence that listens. Calla stood at the edge of the harbor, eyes on the horizon. The city bustled behind her, unaware that the tide had changed in ways the weather couldn't explain. She touched her pendant. It was cool again, no longer pulsing, but she could feel its rhythm inside her now. Every breath seemed to echo the ocean's hum. As she walked back through the market streets, fishermen nodded at her, murmuring blessings without knowing why. She noticed gulls circling closer than usual, not cawing, just watching. At first, she thought she was imagining things, but then a child pointed at her and said, Mama, look, she's glowing. Calla froze. The sunlight reflected off her skin, not normally, but softly, as though her body remembered the deep. She pulled her hood up and hurried home, heart pounding. The ocean was no longer outside her. It was becoming her voice. That night, she heard the first whisper clearly. It wasn't Marinus. It was older, wider, a current made of sound and memory. It called her name not through ears, but through water itself, like the resonance of a shell pressed close. Calla, it said. The balance needs its keeper. She sat upright in bed, heart racing. Who are you? She whispered aloud. The air shimmered faintly, like heat over sand.
You carry the bond of the two worlds. The tide must flow both ways. Images flooded her mind. Ships in storms, wells tangled in nets, coral turning to ash. The ocean is fading, the voice said. It remembers what humans forget. Tears burned her eyes. You want me to fix it? She whispered. The answer came gentle but unyielding. Not fix, guide. The sea will listen to you now, if you will listen to it. Calla barely slept. She spent the following day wandering the shoreline, waves licking at her ankles as if greeting their own. The pendant glowed faintly with each step she took closer to the surf. And then, when she placed her palm on the water, she heard everything. The migration songs of whales deep below, the clatter of coral cracking under pollution, the silent scream of dying reefs. It overwhelmed her. She fell to her knees, clutching her head. "Stop," she cried. The sound faded instantly. The ocean obeyed. That terrified her more than anything. The realization struck hard. She wasn't merely a bridge. She was a voice of command. She could soothe or summon, calm or destroy. And that power came with no instruction manual, just instinct, memory, and a heart that still ached for a man who was now part of the tide itself. That night, the dream came again, but this time, she wasn't on the shore. She was beneath. The coral city glowed brighter than before, restored and alive. And at the center stood Marinus, his form shimmering like living moonlight. "You're hearing them now," he said, smiling softly. "You're hearing what I always heard." She ran to him, the water weightless around her. "It's too much," she said, voice trembling. "It's everything." He cupped her face, warmth flowing through his hands. "That's what love is, Calla. Everything." She wept, realizing this wasn't just about him. It never had been. It was about connection, between people and sea, between memory and future, between what's loved and what's lost. "You can guide them," he whispered. "You can save both worlds." She tried to hold him, but he faded into the current, leaving only warmth and the echo of his voice. "Don't fear your tide." Calla awoke before dawn, the city still sleeping, the horizon blushing faintly pink. She walked barefoot to the water's edge, pendant glowing softly against her chest. She took one steady breath and whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore." The sea rippled in response, gentle waves curling at her feet like approval. In that quiet moment, she finally understood. She wasn't losing herself to the ocean. She was remembering who she had always been. The next evening, the ocean called again, but this time it wasn't gentle. The wind howled, waves rose like restless beasts, and the strange hum rolled through the air, deep and mournful. Calla ran to the pier as fishermen shouted and pulled in their boats. "It's rising too fast," one yelled. But Calla didn't feel fear. She felt recognition. The sea wasn't angry. It was summoning. She stepped closer, barefoot, the water soaking her dress. Her pendant pulsed rapidly against her skin, flashing between silver and blue. The melody that had once haunted her dreams now roared through her chest like thunder. She could hear Marinus's voice in the surge. "It's time." The storm wasn't here to destroy. It was here to awaken what was left of the bond between worlds. As lightning split the sky, Calla saw something beneath the waves, a shimmer of scales, thousands of them, swirling like a living aurora. The merfolk were rising. One by one, they emerged from the depths, not as monsters, but as guardians draped in kelp and pearl. At their center, a tall, pale figure surfaced, Marinus' advisor, Sarai, her hair flowing like ink in water. "Human?" she called, her voice vibrating through the storm. "You have his bond. The Sea King's love warns through you now. Do you understand what that means?" Calla nodded, trembling. "It means I can't run anymore." Sarai's expression softened. "Good, because running would drown us all." The waves climbed higher, but they did not crash. They hovered, held by her voice. Every sound, every breath was balanced on Calla's will. The world paused between ruin and rebirth. The storm's roar dimmed, replaced by a low hum, like a heartbeat shared between the sea and sky. "Why are you here?" Calla asked. "To restore the depths," Sarai replied. "The surface has forgotten us. The bond weakens. You are the bridge Marinus left behind." The words hit her like salt in a wound. "He's gone," Calla whispered, eyes stinging. "He's part of the tide now." Sarai tilted her head. "The tide does not forget, nor does it die. It remembers, and so must you." From under the waves, the merfolk began to sing, not in words, but in harmonies that stirred the ocean itself. The sound tugged at Calla's soul, pulling her to the edge of choice. She could either turn away and live as a human, or answer the call and live as something more. When she stepped into the water, the sea embraced her like an old friend. Her feet left the sand, her body lightened, and the water shimmered gold around her. The pendant burst into light, and she felt it, his heartbeat. "Marinus, you're still here," she gasped, her tears mixing with salt. "Always," his voice murmured through the current, "but not as before. You must finish what we began." Memories cascaded, his laughter, his touch, the night she thought was a mistake. But it had never been a mistake. It was destiny wrapped in love's disguise. Her grief turned to strength. "Then I'll finish it," she vowed, "for both of us." As dawn broke, the sea calmed at last. The storm clouds parted, revealing sunlight that painted the waves in shades of silver and rose. The merfolk began to sink back beneath the surface, their songs fading into the deep. Sarai lingered, her eyes unreadable. "The sea has chosen you," she said quietly. "But know this, love that bridges two worlds will always demand a price." Calla looked out toward the horizon where the light met the endless blue. "Then let it take what it must, as long as both worlds remember what we fought for." Sarai nodded once, then disappeared beneath the surface. Alone again, Calla stood in the surf, her dress clinging to her skin, the pendant's glow steady now. She closed her eyes, hearing the ocean's whisper. "The depths remember." The following days felt dreamlike, as if the line between sea and sky had blurred permanently. The world above had changed. Quiet fishermen whispered of calm waters that suddenly filled their nets, of dolphins returning to shores once silent. The news spoke of strange bioluminescent blooms across the Atlantic, calling it a miracle of the tides. But Calla knew it wasn't a miracle. It was a response. The ocean was waking, remembering its promises. Yet each time it glowed, her strength dimmed a little more. The pendant's light no longer comforted. It drained her, piece by piece, feeding the balance she had sworn to restore. In her small apartment by the dock, she traced her fingers over its surface, whispering, "How much longer?" The sea outside shimmered faintly in reply, like it was listening and mourning.
On the third night, she heard footsteps behind her. Soft, deliberate, familiar. "You shouldn't be here," she said, without turning. And yet came the voice she had dreamed of every night since. Warm, low, impossible. She turned slowly, and there he stood, Marina's. His body glowed faintly, translucent at the edges, but his eyes were still the same impossible shade of tide water blue. "You're real," she breathed, stepping forward, afraid he'd vanish. "Real enough," he said, a sad smile on his lips. "The ocean gave me back to you. For a moment." She reached out, her hand trembling, and he caught it, cool, solid, alive. The ocean outside rose and fell in sync with their hearts. "Why now?" she whispered. "Because the balance is almost complete," he said softly. "But to finish it, you must release me. You must let me go." Her chest tightened painfully. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I can't lose you again." He brushed a tear from her cheek, leaving a trail of light where his fingers touched. "You won't," he murmured. "You'll carry me, in every wave that listens to you, in every storm that bows to your voice." The air trembled with energy, like even the wind grieved their fate. "The worlds can't both hold me. One will collapse." Calla's voice cracked. "Then let mine collapse." He smiled, aching and gentle. "No, my love. You are the world now." Lightning flared far out at sea, though the skies were clear. She could feel the pull in her bones, the ocean's ancient rhythm demanding a choice. "If I let you go, what happens to me?" He looked at her like the answer broke him. "You become what you were always meant to be." They walked to the shoreline hand in hand. The moon hung heavy above them, its reflection trembling across the surface. The merfolk had returned, silent witnesses to what they both knew must happen. The pendant at her chest pulsed like a living heart, and she understood. The ocean wasn't asking for a sacrifice. It was offering a transformation. "Marina's," she said softly, "I was human when I loved you, and that was enough." He smiled faintly. "And now, you're more than human. That's what makes you dangerous and divine." As she pressed the pendant to his chest, light erupted around them, swallowing the world in silver. For a heartbeat, she saw everything. The coral cities, the whales, the laughter they'd shared on the ship. Then the light folded inward, and he was gone. The sea fell still. The air hummed, heavy with love and loss. When the dawn came, the ocean lay calm as glass. Calla stood alone on the sand, the pendant now dim, just a shard of pearl on a thin chain. But she didn't cry. The tide brushed her feet like a promise, and somewhere deep below, she felt his presence. Not as absence, but as a rhythm. The first fishing boats ventured out again, and the horizon shimmered gold. "He's not gone," she whispered to the waves. "He's home." A voice inside her, gentle and eternal, replied, "And so are you."
Weeks passed and the cruise port bloomed again with life. Tourists returned, oblivious to the miracle that had unfolded beneath the waves. The waters were clearer now, alive with color and song. The old sailor said the sea had found its soul again, though none knew why. Calla lived quietly near the shore, teaching local children to swim, telling them stories of courage, not magic. But sometimes, when she stepped into the water, the sea shifted.
The waves leaned toward her as if listening. The fish swirled closer, and a deep, familiar hum filled the air. She didn't fight it anymore. She belonged to both worlds now. In her dreams, she still saw him, Marinus, his laughter echoing through coral halls. But it no longer hurt. It felt like memory, not loss. She was whole. The world was healing, and she was its heartbeat. One morning, a letter arrived. No stamp, no address, just a folded parchment damp with sea salt. Inside were 5 words written in swirling ink. The currents still sing you. She smiled, tears glistening on her cheeks. It wasn't grief, it was gratitude. That evening, she walked to the very edge of the pier where the horizon bled into pink and gold. The pendant around her neck warmed, pulsing once. She whispered to the wind, "I'm still listening." The sea answered, not in words, but in a melody of waves and wind and faraway laughter. She closed her eyes, let it wash over her, and the air around her shimmered faintly blue. For the first time, she sang back, not a song of sorrow, but of love that never drowned, only changed shape. The children who played near the beach saw her often after that, standing knee-deep in the surf at dawn, her hair fluttering in the sea breeze, her dress always damp at the hem. "She talks to the ocean," one girl whispered to another, "and it talks back." The adults smiled at the tale, dismissing it as fantasy, but sometimes when the tide rolled in, they heard faint humming beneath the wind. A lullaby carried on the waves. The same song that calmed the storms, the same one the whales seemed to echo when they breached near the coast. The world had forgotten many things, but not her voice. Years later, a great storm rose unexpectedly, one that should have swallowed the bay whole. But as the wind screamed and the waves towered, something miraculous happened. The sea stopped at the edge of the town, the water glowing faintly blue. And in that light, the silhouette of a woman appeared, calm, radiant, her arms open to the tide. The storm broke around her, not against her. By dawn, the waters had retreated, leaving behind only shells and silence. The townsfolk said it was luck. The sailors said it was her. The ocean said nothing, but the waves rolled softer that day as if bowing in remembrance. On quiet nights when the moon hung heavy over the horizon, travelers swore they saw her reflection shimmering just beneath the surface, smiling, watching, listening. They said if you whispered your heartbreak to the sea, it would ease by morning, carried away by the woman who once loved its king. The merfolk called her the keeper of tides. The humans called her the miracle at Maris Bay. But the ocean, endless and knowing, called her what it always had, Calla. The girl who heard the waves, the woman who sang them back to life. The queen who never drowned. And if you stand there at sunrise, just where the sand turns silver, you might hear it too, the whisper of 2 worlds forever bound. Love does not sink, it transforms.
Thank you for staying till the end. Please do well to like and subscribe to the channel, and also don't forget to drop your thoughts in the comment. It means a lot to me.